Hey everyone, I thought I'd do something a little bit different today and walk you through my process as I'm drawing and kind of just chat for a little bit. So today's drawing was inspired by Howl's Moving Castle of all things. There's a scene in the movie where there's these little shooting star things and they're coming down and landing in a pool of water. It is going to look nothing like that, but if you're just wondering where the vibe came from, that's what I was thinking about when I started sketching this. You can see at first I'm kind of just trying to get the shape of it right. Three-dimensional things like this are, for me, really challenging to draw, so this was about the point where I started getting confused which side of the room was on top and which wasn't. So I started doing color coding to kind of help me figure out how things were wrapping around each other and what should be in front of what, ultimately speaking. Once I got that base kind of sorted out, I started mucking around with getting the outlines on top of it. I want this to be a really bright, cheerful, kind of glittery star thing against a dark background, so instead of doing the outlines in black like I normally would, I'm doing them in white. I'm also doing them pretty heavy. That's honestly mainly a laziness thing. It's a lot easier to get the outlines looking smooth if they're a little bit fatter than if they're really fine lines, since a little bit of wiggle in your hand doesn't quite show as badly. That said, even with the fatter outlines, I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so I'm still going through and kind of tidying things up and making the curves kind of match together a bit nicer, get rid of a little bit of the jiggle. I've noticed as it gets hotter out and we move into the summer months, I do see a fair bit more feedback in my pen where it's just a little bit confused about where it is, and you get these little wavy lines, and doesn't help that, you know, hot hands stick better to glass surfaces. So there's a little bit of compensation there. You can see that this does not look terribly like a star. Like I said, it's pretty stylized. The ones in Howl are also fairly stylized, so it's kind of more of a going for the vibe of something sparkly and shiny falling than a literal star. But I kind of enjoyed doing it anyway. I went for these kind of, I don't know what kind of palette you would call that. It's not exactly a pastel, but it's not exactly like loud either. It's somewhere in the middle. I went for these colors that I happen to like. I don't know if they actually technically go together, but I personally am a fan of anything that has kind of a purple tone and a green tone, and then yellow just goes with everything. You can tell that I've got wonderful fashion sense. So here I'm kind of thinking through what was on front and what's in the back originally, and adding in shadows to kind of accentuate that, as well as having the two different tone colors. After I've done that, I'm dropping it all down in opacity so it gets a little bit more opaque, and then I'm going to do the color effects with little splotches of different light inside of it, kind of like star patterns. So the first layer I put in there is just the star field, and then I'm putting the, I don't know what it's called, splatter on top of it, putting different layers on it, kind of like how you would build out a constellation. I've got a video on that as well if you want to check it out. I'll put a little tag link thing to it. And so inside of it, I'm just kind of building that out to give it a bit of texture and a bit more depth, make it look more like kind of this clear object with things floating in it instead of just a surface. And then once that's done, I'm working on where it's going to actually be impacting the water. I'm not very good at drawing water, so I'm not going to draw like the actual water. I'm just doing some kind of rings to show the impact, and then I'll add in some shadows and reflections later to make it look a little bit more realistic. Since this thing is a star, I want it to glow quite a bit, and I'm going to do that in a couple different layers. The first one here is doing the color glow based on which ribbon it is, and then I'm adding a bit of white to the center of that. The white in the center of a colored ring looks kind of like when you see streetlights on a rainy night and it gets that kind of blurred pattern, or for me if I'm looking at a light without my glasses on. So it kind of gives that similar feeling of something glowing. I'm also going to put an extra layer behind it that's just plain white, really light, and that'll be to kind of give an extra halo around the whole thing. So the different levels of light and different layers of light kind of help make it look a little bit more 3D and just a lot more sparkly. I love sparkly things, so we're going for it. Let's see, I just put in a gradient that does give it a bit of the blue at the bottom, so kind of the beginning of the suggestion of water. And then you can see I also started collecting all my layers together into a group, which lets me copy it all at once and then mirror it all at once. So it's a lot easier than trying to go through and merge the layers down. You can just toss them in a group and then it acts like a merged layer, but without any of the fuss. So then I'm going through and kind of making wavy patterns on all of my lines for the underwater reflection bits. So the star and then also my little wave impact lines. And I don't know what I screwed up here, but you can tell I screwed something up by the long blur of edit undos there. We'll see. Nobody knows what that was. Of course, I mean, I never screw anything up. It was perfect, I'm sure. Now I'm just touching up some extra stars, adding some things in, playing around with deciding how blurred or not blurred I want those lines, kind of make them where I want it. And then now that I've kind of settled on how I want it to be, I am done. And that's all the more there is to it. As you can tell, this was pretty stream of consciousness. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, like and subscribe. Thanks, y'all.